What is up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel if you've been here before, and if you're new, hi. So I'm back with another Blade video. I think this is my third one because I'm just really obsessed with the character. He's very fun to play about with, and so today I'm going to be doing a light cone video because I was going through Reddit and I saw a question about whether you need to pull his light cone or whether you could save other characters, and then just how good is a secret vow because everybody puts the 5-star options on the Fall of an Aeon and something irreplaceable in different positions. Now, I don't talk about future content too much because I don't personally like hedging my bets on something that could change on release, but at the end of the day, pulling for a light cone is a big investment, and so it's always worth making sure that that decision is made with a good, sound reasoning. As such, today I'm going to be doing some number crunching and talking about his signature, the Unreachable side, and how it fares against some of his other options. I do think that his HP scaling and the crit rate percentage requirement for Rutilant Arena have kind of put people in a corner because obviously his signature appeals to that, but I do want to say, like, overall, after unpacking everything, while it is, I'm not going to lie to anyone, looking like his best light cone, there are easy ways to get around it, and so I'm going to cover off kind of like build options as well as just going outside of just saying like this is the best pure DPS light cone. Now I do want to say thanks very much to anyone who's been liking or commenting or subscribing or just hanging around and listening to the video. I do appreciate a lot. Full disclosure, I'm very fortunate to be full-time employed, so this is just a hobby for me that I like doing, but obviously, you know, I do appreciate that any interaction is a good interaction, and I'm very grateful, so thanks. Anyway, with that said, let's get into some build context, as well as running the numbers, doing a comparison of the DPS light cones, and then just factoring in some other outside options. So we're going to start with a bit of information on build context and how to get him up to satisfying the Rutilant Arena requirements, as well as just factoring in what his crit rate percentage should be as a main DPS or even sub DPS. So his light cone, the signature one, does come in with 18% crit rate, which is a kind of big selling point but somewhat annoying because it syncs up well with the 70% threshold of Rutilant Arena, and so it just seems like an easy purchase to kind of get past that. However, looking at his crit rate overall, his minor traces do give him 12% crit rate on top of the 5% base. Now, I am going to ignore that his E2 does give a crit rate percentage boost, because if you are wailing on Eidolons, you're probably also just not going to be watching a video on whether or not you should pull his light cone. So let's say we have a base crit rate of 17%, and then either Rutilant Arena or Inert Salsoto are going to give us another 8%. If you are going Disciple, the 4-piece effect will also let Blade have a basic permanent 8% crit rate percentages, or 16% per battle. So we're going to carry this across into our calculations overall as well. So assuming 0 substats or light cones equipped, we have a base 25% crit rate Blade with up to 16% from our 4-piece, bringing us to 41%. This means, depending on the main body item that we can have a crit rate of 73.4 with 0 crit rate substat rolls on our other pieces if we equipped a crit rate main body piece, chest piece, or we can have a crit rate of 41% with 0 substat rolls with a main body piece that is a crit rate damage main stat. The obvious shout is to think, well, I can just have the 73.4% crit rate and be done with it build-wise, but then you are missing out on it's like 60% crit rate damage of a main body piece. So the next question is, can we even get there through substat rolls without factoring in any crit rate percent from a light cone? So the extra 29% of crit rate that you're missing will equal 10 medium value 5-star relic substat rolls of crit rate to get Blade across the threshold. Keep in mind that you can get 4 to 5 upgrades of each relic. It's not entirely unrealistic, but crossing the threshold might involve a little more luck than expected. Okay, so where does that leave us? Is it overall possible to get to 70% crit rate without purchasing his light cone and still being able to use a crit damage piece? Well, yes, and I'm going to be using a build that I've seen online that's already using the new Relic set and Planetary Ornament set, so we're good to go. I don't think it's unachievable. I think it's worth just saying overall that if you were looking to pick up his main light cone just to try and satisfy crit rate percent requirements, you don't need to. You can still go with a crit damage percent main chest piece. Cool. So let's slot in some light cones and see what we can do to now start working out just how well each light cone does on a DPS way. For disclosure purposes, like I say, I am using a build that I saw on Reddit that meets the crit rate values, so I know that this just isn't some random substats that I've put in to try and like, dock to the results. The relic set we'll be using is the Longevue Disciple with a crit damage main piece and speed feat, and then the Planetary Ornament we'll be using Rutilant Arena with HP % rope, and we're actually going with wind damage, and I'll talk about that in a second. Those are my baseline stats, they are on screen, but before literally anything else I do say, I will be running with a number of assumptions, and I do kind of hate that I have to add these in, but obviously different league rankings will put different weapons at different spots, and so I need to kind of cover off what actually shaped my investigation. So assumption number 1, we're going to be excluding the impact of team buffs, or having support characters mess around with our stats, so like a Yukong crit buff or anything like that. Assumption 2, it's a level 80 blade, we're using level 80 light cones only, and we are only using destruction light cones. There is an argument to be made about using some of the abundance light cones because they have high HP, but just given the way that blade plays, you're going to want a strong healer, and so you're probably going to put the light cone on that healer, obviously. Assumption number 3, like I say, I'm using a wind damage orb because I did some with a HP % and the build difference was negligible. I think it came to about 2% total difference for the comparisons that I did. Obviously the HP % sphere will impact how heavy of a tank your blade is, so there's a lot of value in using that, but I can't cover for every eventuality, and I wanted to keep this as remotely close to how people would expect to see their DPS being built. Assumption 4, single target damage only. I've not included the cleave because obviously the cleave scales with the amount of single target damage you're doing, but it's too unreliable to guarantee X amount of enemies, and so I didn't want to shape any assumptions. Finally, well, that's a lie. Assumption 5, second to finally, the enemy is never broken because the calculations start to get thrown around everywhere because he loses out on talent procs if the enemies are always broken, and so some light cones also prefer the situational break effect, such as the value of On the Fall of an Aeon. Now finally, it's worth noting that some overall rankings do have Super Imposition 5 Mutual Demise or Under the Blue Sky as very strong contenders, depending on how you're looking at it, because of the 12 to 24% crit rate. However, because we are using a base 70% plus crit rate build, we're losing out on the overall value of how much those crit rates average into the actual damage that is done. I'm taking average numbers, not maximum crit numbers, and so that's going to definitely heavily influence just how strong a crit rate weapon does. If I was factoring in the value of crit rate, then obviously I'd just say pull for a signature light cone anyway, and that's not what I'm trying to do. Cool, a lot of assumptions, let's move on. So just taking an overall look at the numbers on screen, off the bat that unfortunately you can see that his signature, the Unreachable side, is a very strong contender. Even at Super Imposition 1, it's beating out everything else, both in terms of raw HP and the total damage you can expect from his ult, his enhanced basic, the works. If you're looking to main blade, you can at least be certain that it's not a waste of resources, for lack of a better word, because it's a very valuable and top performing light cone on him, and it's given like the best ranking if I was going to put it in a table just off this alone. When we come down to it a bit, you can see that the next closest weapon in performance-wise is the Super Imposition 5, a Secret Vow, which is a 4-star light cone, but only when this has its active damage buff. And it's interesting enough that the Super Imposition 1 version with buff also outperformed 5-star weapons like Something Irreplaceable and On the Fall of an Aeon. So if you have a copy of this light cone around, just use that. We'll delve into that a bit further though. Naturally, like I say, this would tell me that even one copy of a Secret Vow is going to be your best option to drop on Blade, but if we start to factor in the time when the buff isn't available, the light cone does start to fade off a tiny bit. It's not a lot, but it's still worth keeping in mind because the buff can be very unreliable depending on your HP %, and if you're pairing Blade up with a good healer, you might not always satisfy the damage buff threshold. So while it is apparent that one copy of a Secret Vow will set you up for a long time, you're going to want to dive into a bit deeper before making any sweeping assumptions, because without the buff you can see that we do instead fall into a situation where Something Irreplaceable can edge forward slightly on a Super Imposition 1 to Super Imposition 1 basis. Now it is worth pointing out that a Secret Vow, like I say, is very unpredictable, and so managing the HP lower than an enemy buff will come and go quite flexibly. It's not something to gauge your bets on overall as being consistent, but notwithstanding all of this, because of where the numbers sit, it does look like it's going to carry itself well for a 4-star light cone, even contending against the 2 5-star options, not including his signature. Reading the numbers then, I would say overall that the priority of light cones for me personally on a DPS option would be just to try and pick up a copy of Secret Vow where possible if I wasn't going to pull for his signature. However, if I am pulling for his signature because they're on the same banner, or if I'm pulling for Secret Vow, you never know how your luck could go. Pull responsibly. With regard to that, then we need to kind of consider return on investment and the overall value of the light cones in regards to kind of what I've got for your overall resources. So obviously, like I say, his signature is coming up as the kind of must pull best use case because it's top in the leaderboards. But you've got to remember that his ability is nice, but a light cone can be very situational, and there's no telling that his light cone will be a good light cone on other destruction characters, or whether in the future we could see it being power balanced, not crept, but balanced by a 4-star light cone with HP passives that kind of match the overall value of this light cone. If you wanted to scale on max damage, then obviously try and pick up a single copy and it would be worth the resources, but I don't necessarily think it's the be all and end all for your account. It is apparent to me that something irreplaceable isn't worth the store currency if you're going to get it for Blade overall, as the increase in DPS overall is negligible. I was somewhat disappointed in On the Fall of an Aeon, as I initially thought it would fare a lot better, but there is clear evidence that the more you superimpose it, the better it gets, so there is that. In terms of not min-maxing and just slotting on any light cone and playing the game without optimized loadouts for every battle, I would say first place does go to his signature, followed by second place for a Secret Vow, and then third place priority going to literally anything else On the Fall of an Aeon, something irreplaceable, or even some of the superimposed 5 versions of 3-star light cones such as Collapsing Sky and Mutual Demise. I did say outside of a pure DPS, there are a few other things to consider. That is mainly the fact that a lot of team setups also require Blade to be the damage taker and build for as much HP as reasonably possible. With the build and stats I've been referencing, his health is always sitting around a low 6k, except from with his signature, which is nowhere near his max, and I will say that max HP and self-sustain are a pretty good priority for him. Now, I was getting talent heals from a Secret Vow of around 1.8k, but heals from his signature at 2.1k on his passive. To me, 300 HP is pretty negligible, so while the value of the overall max HP is obvious, I think in the grand schemes you can make up your own mind about the self-sustain on the talent. If you are building Blade as intended, there's also the throwaway comment that the more investment in HP should be made, and as such, when thinking about overall self-sustain, his signature does give him the max utility. However, something irreplaceable does get an honorable mention for the high HP base stats it has. When looking outside of just flat DPS numbers, the ranking for light cones changes slightly, as I think something irreplaceable could get to share the second spot with a Secret Vow, but it's obviously not doing the same level of damage overall. Just factor that in. Because if you are playing Blade as intended, you're most likely using a very strong healer, and someone like Loatra is just going to force very frequent drops of the Secret Vow buff. So finally, what's my conclusion? Unfortunately, no matter which way I look at it, I do think his signature is the best option, with the Secret Vow coming in a good, stable second on flat DPS alone. While I originally thought that Super Imposition 1 of the Unfall of an Aeon would be a good pickup, I do think it loses value compared to a lot of other options, and I'd only pick this up if you want the option of a 5-star light cone that's easy to superimpose. With that said, it's a guaranteed free light cone that requires 0 spending and starts to increase in value the more you superimpose it. Long-term planning without a desire to spend anything on the light cone banner could mean that a few weeks of the simulated universe could get you a nice copy of On the Fall of an Aeon at superimpose 5, and at least if you are pure free to play, you have that pickup option. Do I think that something irreplaceable is worth the spending of currency? No, definitely not. I would probably just settle for a copy of On the Fall of an Aeon if I didn't have a Secret Vow or that light cone. So with all that said, does that mean that I would personally be pulling for his light cone? Honestly, no. I'm going to just aim for S5 On the Fall of an Aeon. While it's not the most optimal, it's just accessible for me, and I actually don't have the money right now, to be honest, and I also can't think of any content that would warrant me spending resources for the damage increase, except for if I was trying to make content and I was like, come watch me pull. For me personally, I'd still like to diversify my account a bit further, and while the light cone is definitely worth it to people who want to main him or pull for light cones, I mean I pulled for Jing Yuan's for example, I don't think it's worth it for me personally. My account is missing characters like Bronya and a certain pink-haired Future Seer, as well as Imbibita Lunai version of my Dan Hung, and so to a large degree, that has a lot more value for me right now than optimizing my Blade. I don't know why I just said that because I don't have Blade yet, but optimizing Blade for the extra points of damage. However, like I say, is it worth it? Yes, it's going to make your life a lot easier, but is it worth it in terms of spending the resources because you think you have to? No, I don't think so. I think you can get around the requirements of things like crit rate and the extra HP by looking into the other options you have available. Okay, that was a bit of a long one just to talk about light cones, but if you did stick it out, Thanks so much. I always appreciate it. And maybe I'll see you in the next one. Maybe I won't. Bye.